you're here. We're so excited. Happy New Year. Feliz Año Nuevo. If you know another language, drop it in the chat. Help educate us all. We're so excited you're here on this new year of 2022. I love even numbers, so I'm excited about 2022. Let's see what happens. So you are in session 5. You're with us on session 5 of our sessions here. You've every month, every second Monday of the month, you're joining us to learn together. And every time we design together as a team and we learn from you, every single Monday we're together, we learn from you. So just know that, and then we use it for our county offices. So it's a fantastic relationship for sure. So expert learning is the topic of today. In the meantime, feel free, as you've done already and you're used to, introduce yourselves. Feel free to ask a question, share an idea or connection that you see, and or share a hyperlink or resources, some goodie that you found during your vacation that you were thinking about inclusive literacy. Why not, right? We're all geek out on that sort of thing, but we're just excited and happy that you're here. Our next one is February 14th. We were talking about that. Like, I don't know if we really planned that well or gave partners an out that day. I have to go to that webinar. I'm not sure. We'll leave that alone. All right, friends. And so I'm sure you're used to us 2 years in, but when you click on the chat, if you want to talk to the panelists versus, or the participants versus hosts, feel free to choose the appropriate drop-down menu. So the 5 of us are on the next slide. We probably become familiar to you. Shamron, Becky, myself, Elisa, and then Elise and Wyatt. We are supporting our state across our state with this CESL work. And then I just look at these sisters as literally as sisters and my own little PLC that helps strengthen what I feel like we're passionate about already. So you're in good space. All right, so the next slide is one that we use often in every facilitation that we execute, and is giving our participants an opportunity to take a moment, right? Because giving us options to self-regulate, perceive, and act. So we're going to start the timer here in about 10 seconds. So consider these 3 questions in front of you. What within these 2 minutes might you need around your space to better support your engagement? About perception, what is the best way to perceive your content? I'm sure the slide deck is getting dropped often as our room is getting bigger and bigger here. So which is the best way for you to perceive the content? For me, sometimes I download the slide deck to my iPad so I can take notes. Sometimes I like my second monitor, your choice. And then what are your preferences today for sharing your thinking? Just a little commercial. We're not going to have breakout rooms today per se, but we're definitely going to have discussion boards. The chat is always available for that. All right, so we'll give you about 1.5 minutes or so left to do that. All right, wonderful. Maybe you also needed a snack or something to drink too. So in honor of somebody that looks very familiar, maybe on your screen, I don't know if you how many of you love the classic show, The Golden Girls. Our colleague Wyatt created this feelometer or mood meter. How are you feeling today? Choose the number that corresponds with your mood today and drop it in the chat. And Wyatt, you said you omitted a picture, a very racy picture of Miss.
It was racy, and it was really hard for me to not put it in.
Yeah. All right, let's see. 9s, 9 with exclamation point. All right, Jennifer. Aurora 5. I'm with you, Aurora. Yes, yes. Becky, you're at 8. Yes.
think 9 is the cool Betty White.
All right, all right. She's so hip, like classic. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Hi, Gwen. 2, 4, 9. I'm a 4. I love my team for sure. And 9. Yeah. 6. She's eating something, right? For 6. Okay. Yeah.
No one's angry. No one's number 6. That's
Number
I guess.
6. Angrily eating that hot dog. I don't know about that. Okay. Might have been too telling. All right, my friends. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. In the next slide, this is one shift that we've done through the last couple of months of sessions, and actually through facilitating some of the work in our context. Some of our teams have said, okay, Lisa, this is great, but can we come up with a, what is inclusive literacy per se, an operational definition of inclusive literacy? So this is our attempt at that. And every month we're refining it and we're open to feedback. But so just so we're all on the same page as far as what we mean in this context, we're thinking about what ensures access for all students in general education classrooms. We think about inclusive literacy as something that expands the definition of literacy to include communication, problem solving, critical thinking, and multiple forms of media. And it also provides options to students to progress in content area or disciplinary learning. And so this might not be completely like, you might look at this and say, of course, that makes perfect sense, but we just wanted to put it in the room. And so I wanted to have us think about kiddos, and elementary is not my background. My background is secondary, but I've learned so much from this team already. And one of the reminders that my colleagues have shared is, you know, when the little ones are little, K3, they're learning to read, right? And I actually have a 4-year-old at home and I'm living that. Also have a 19 and a 16, but anyway, so the little one is literally learning to read. And then we know as the kids get older in upper grades, they're reading to learn. So inclusive literacy says, what happens if our children, our students don't have all the skills yet to read to learn? What options might we provide to expand that, to broaden that, so they are also included in that? Because obviously the learning cannot stop as a result of not being able to read. And so we know there's multiple parallel lanes constantly working in every single classroom. And so this idea of inclusive literacy is overarching, over-encompassing. And sometimes it feels almost too broad in general, but that's why these webinars are the beginning of getting us, helping us zoom in on that. And so bigger picture here, our webinars have been comprised of these. If you've been with us the last 5 sessions, we've gone through mindset, the idea of mindset and how we know that it starts with our mind, right? How we shift practices. And then we talked about goal setting and the importance of that, barriers, identifying barriers, options. And then today is around this expert learning piece. And what I've shared with my team is that expert learning, I think about it when I was a principal at an IB school, we had this flyer on every wall that said learner profile, the IB learner profile. My district had a district learner profile. So some of these pieces, as you examine them today, they will feel familiar to you, like, oh, we're already working towards that. But within this context, we're calling them expert learning. And Elise is going to walk us through some of that today. To that end, today's goals are that we will support you in deepening understanding of inclusive literacy practices by defining characteristics of expert learners and understanding instructional strategies to support expert learners. Now, little commercial here, know that the webinar are not the only option to expand your understanding of expert learners. We have other resources and we'll allude to that towards the end. Every month we produce 4 statewide resources and you have lots of options to go more narrow, more deep, or more superficial, depending on what your brain is curious about. But today we're going to talk about defining the characteristics and understanding instructional strategies. And there's one that I promise, it made our heart race when Elise walked us through it. We'll see what happens, Elise. All right, so the documents that may be available to support your learning today, these will look familiar if you've been with us already. The home-based document, a note-taking guide, and discussion boards by grade level band. And then let's dive in a little bit, just dabbling into our own experience. And then Lisa, like I said, she's going to walk us through an activity. As you think about the idea of expert learning, when do you feel like an expert learner? And or how might you define expert learning? So chew on that idea, expert learning. What connections are you making? When do you feel that way? Like, oh, I nailed this. I got this. I know how to learn this context. And then how might you define that? So I'll pause and let you process a little bit on your own and then drop it in the chat. Stacy, you took the words out of my mouth. To have the tools needed to learn new content, for sure. For sure. Thank you. Social justice issues, Jennifer, thank you. Vision becomes my design. Pie in the sky, huh, Fred? When the thing that's in here gets executed and lived and it lands, for sure. Persist and finding resources, for sure. Thank you, Gwen. Becky, I feel like an expert learner when I'm engaging with content or topic of choice. So choice matters. If you ever taught middle school, Lord have mercy, we know how much that matters. Kim, when I know the information, look how to learn about it, for sure. Revisit or redesign something, and I can listen for others. Absolutely. For me, I feel like I can be an expert learner when I have the room to make it what I need it to be. And by that, I mean, sometimes my iPad is enough. Other times I have my little pocket full of colorful pencils that I can circle and arrow and all of that, right? Like having those choices helps me feel like I can. Thank you, Julia. Being able to apply, practice, and reflect, utilize strategies, active and metacognitive skills. Wonderful. All right, Elise, I'm going to pass the baton to you. Walk us through this activity next.
Thanks, Elisa. So hello, everyone. Because expert learning lives in that realm of executive functioning and metacognition, and it's often difficult to describe because it's so, those skills are so internalized, I'm going to ask you to engage in an activity now that makes your inner thinking visible. On the screen in front of you, there are 3 different paragraphs. I'm going to ask you to choose one of the paragraphs just based on the title. The first is a text from A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, and it was his birthday yesterday. The next one is about nucleated RBC, and the last one is on a topic called concatenation. So these texts were chosen because they are very complex and they might take some specialized knowledge. And I needed something that would provide a challenge to an educated audience like you. If it looks hard or it is difficult to wrestle with, it's meant to be. So I intentionally chose texts and topics that would probably be unknown to most people. So in the chat, we're going to drop the links to these 3 different texts, and you can choose the one that you like. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read, but here's the thing I want you to do is as you're reading, I want you to pay attention to the thought processes, strategies, and inner dialogue occurring. Because we know that when we read something difficult, we do certain things and certain things run through our minds, or we might ask questions. And if you'd like, you can do stream of consciousness and type those things in the chat. After having done this with my colleagues, I'm going to ask that you refrain from using curse words or use, symbols and asterisks in place of those. So go ahead, choose your topic, read that topic, and as you read, please share your inner dialogue in the chat. Let's go ahead and start. Okay, so as you're reading, what are some thoughts going through your mind? What are some questions you may be asking yourself? What are some, what's the running commentary? And feel free to come off mute and share, or go ahead and place those thoughts in the chat. Emily says she needs a dictionary. Stacy's asking, what do I need to know? Kim saying, what does this word mean?
I looked at all three of the documents to try to find one that maybe appealed to me the most before I dug in, because I was very intimidated by them at first.
One says, what's the gist? Fred's noticing there's unknown acronyms. Jennifer says, of course I chose programming, a subject I failed miserably at in college. But Jennifer, you recognize that there's something that has to do with programming. Shar says, seems like a foreign language. Okay. One of my colleagues said she wants to drop my class when she did this. Read for the gist. Trying to connect what I'm reading to what I think I know about the text topic. Jennifer, maybe I'm not an expert learner. I chose the one I knew most about. Okay, so you're questioning yourself, you're thinking about your own progress, and Stacy's using background knowledge. Okay, so thank you for engaging in that. So what skills or traits did you need to draw upon just now? Chances are you use the skills of highly effective readers that have been identified by research. And if you've taught reading or guided reading, you're probably familiar with those traits of effective readers. But let's take a closer look at those skills and traits. Okay, so when we read, or when expert readers read, they engage in these things. They make predictions, they visualize or develop mental images, they make analogies. Some of them did as you did and connected the new information to what they already knew, their background information. When we talk about literary text, sometimes teachers of literature will say those are the text to self, text to text, text to world connections. They'll self-question and they'll also monitor their own understanding. Right, so that's how you know that you need a dictionary or you need to look something up, or you might also, when you're monitoring your own comprehension, realize you need to go back and reread something. So these are all skills that we use when we engage with text. So how many of you made predictions? How many of you visualized what you were reading? How many of you wanted a dictionary other than, I'm sure it wasn't just one person. So one strategy that goes along with supporting reading of complex text is the think aloud. And as we said before, when we talk about expert learners, we're talking about internal, metacognitive, executive functioning processes that aren't always obvious. So one technique that teachers sometimes employ is using a think aloud. Here's just a brief video excerpt where a teacher from Citizens Academy of Cleveland talks about the effective use of think alouds.
To do a think aloud well.
One, do it quick. Make a skill focus, have the steps on the board behind you. Do it exactly the way you want them to be able to perform the skill once they are proficient at it. Teach them how to think through doing this act so that when they go to do it, they already have the thinking through it part down.
Okay, so a totally legitimate teaching strategy when it comes to grappling with complex text. But now I'm going to pose another question to you. What about students who have dyslexia or other reading difficulties? Or those who are 2 or more grade levels behind in reading? And what about English learners who may not be readers yet or even fluid readers? Can they become expert learners? And how do we create inclusive learning environments so that they continue to access content? I wanted to delineate the difference between expert readers and expert learners. There are a lot of similarities, but there are some very big differences, especially when it comes to talking about inclusive literacy environments. So that first activity we did, I deliberately chose 3 texts because so often in our classrooms, the main means of accessing information, or sometimes the only means of accessing information, is through textbooks or articles or reading passages. So how do we expand and make our learning environments more inclusive so that the only means to learning is not just text? I had my daughter read the paragraph on concatenation. And she did all those things that expert readers do, and she was able to figure it out. She used her background knowledge. She looked up concatenation and saw it meant sequence. She realized that instead of reading this, she would have wanted somebody to preload the vocabulary, or she wanted a different format. So I'm going to let you listen to her and what she says about having text as the only means of access.
I feel like this would be so much easier. Like I could learn this if it wasn't just all in text format, and if it wasn't just all spewing this information at you using vocabulary that it doesn't teach you in the first place.
Okay, so how would you learn it better?
Visually, I liked that it did include examples, like those specific examples such as Hello World, because I would not have understood it if it didn't have that. So I think if you really wanted to learn it, it would have been better, like not in this chunky text format, but instead of actually making people do it hands-on, like actually doing it.
Okay. So Erica did the same thing that you all just engaged in. She read the text and then she described the processes to me that she was going through as she was trying to make sense of the text. I would say she's an expert reader because she was able to, I actually don't understand concatenation, and she was able to explain it to me. Using her knowledge of coding, using her knowledge of that specialized vocabulary, strings, and understanding concatenation is another way of saying sequence. But as she said in the video, she's also an expert learner because she knows her strengths and weaknesses, and she knows her preferred learning modality for this particular topic. And she knew what the lack of front-loading vocabulary did and how it was a disadvantage to her. So what's the difference between fostering expert readers and fostering expert learners? Let's take a look at the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines. I think we already put the link.
I feel like this would be so much.
We already put the link to these guidelines in the chat. We're not going to delve deeply into them, but I wanted you to see some of the guidelines that would have been applicable in this situation, where I asked you to read a complex text. So the ones that are highlighted, I've summarized for you on the next slide. But just as a reminder, or if you're not familiar with UDL guidelines, the guidelines are a framework so that we provide more than one means of learning, so that we provide multiple means of engaging with learning, multiple means of perceiving or taking in information, and multiple means of acting and expressing or demonstrating what we know or practicing skills. So on this next slide, what if I had considered these things before I assigned you one of those 3 readings? What if I had offered alternatives to visual information and illustrated through multiple media? So maybe I didn't just offer text. What if I offered video or offered text to speech? And what if I did clarify vocabulary or provided a glossary or a reference for you? And what if I clarified the syntax and structure of those texts? How could I have supported decoding, understanding of notation and symbols? And more than just what could I have done for you, but how could I have created an environment that optimized, if you look at the second column, individual choice and autonomy, and optimized access to tools and assistive technology? So before my daughter looked up that word, she asked me for permission. She said, am I allowed to look up the definitions? And I thought that is a very kind of typical question from students. They always want to know, are they allowed to do this? Are they allowed to do that? And what do we need to do in classrooms to support that autonomy, to provide flexibility, to provide freedom, to provide discretion to our learners? And then how can we facilitate personal coping skills and strategies and facilitate the use of tools and resources? I'm going to pause because I see some things popping up in the chat. And I want to make sure I recognize what you guys are saying.
There's lots of great connections going on in there with either their own experiences as expert learning or seeing what learning looks like through the eyes of their own children, perhaps, and lots of connections to being able to kind of connect to people and learners being able to choose and use the tools that they need to access the information in the way that makes the most sense. It's really empowering to see what's going on in the chat there.
Yeah, and I appreciate the anecdotes about how it's been an uphill battle to get access to materials other than text. So thank you for sharing those. Sharon, you say these days I learn better by listening. Yeah, so there's options. You can actually listen to books on tapes. This is where the magic happens when students are empowered to access tools. And then it would have encouraged me to learn about something different than I am familiar with. Okay, thank you for continuing to share in that chat. I really appreciate that. So now let's look at the characteristics of expert learners. So if we look at the UDL guidelines again and how they're organized, as a reminder, the whole goal or the whole point of providing multiple means of learning is that we want to foster expert learners who have the following characteristics: that they're purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-directed. So before we go into this next slide, let me say a little bit more about the guidelines. So these traits, we want these to be apparent, not just when it comes to reading, but when it comes to learning in general. We talk about expert readers as having those internalized skills and expert reading involving executive functioning and metacognition. Those things aren't always visible or apparent, and that's very similar to expert learning traits. They're also internalized and related to executive functioning. We saw that think alouds are often a strategy used to help model the skills of expert readers, but I wonder if we can use think alouds in the same way to model the skills of expert learners. When we talk about disciplinary learning or disciplinary literacy, you often hear that we want students to learn how to read and write like scientists, or read and write like mathematicians, or historians, or artists. What would thinking out loud in these various disciplines sound like? So this is a video that talks about the difference between modeling and thinking aloud. So when we talk about internal processes and executive functioning, often the strategy we come up with is we need to model that for our students. And sometimes we use modeling and thinking aloud synonymously. I'm going to ask you to watch this video just to see the difference between modeling and thinking aloud.
A think aloud is different than a model. And I think elementary knocks my socks off with this. Former secondary teacher, I didn't even know about these. It wasn't until I was coaching I really appreciated the power of a think aloud. Let me explain the difference between a think aloud and a model, because for some of us, we might be thinking we're doing a think aloud, but you're doing a model. It's not enough. If I was teaching a kid how to shoot a free throw, I could just model it. Okay, yeah, you're a form. Woo, we gotta work on this. Let me show you. Okay, so you get to the free throw line, and this is a free throw. Okay, so this is what you're gonna do. Got it? Okay, I'm modeling it. You getting it? Got it? Good, your turn. Okay, nothing's really gonna change about his thinking or his ability to do it. Let me switch that. This is a think aloud. Okay, so we're gonna learn how to shoot a free throw. So the first thing I do when I come to the line is I look down. I'm right-handed, my right foot slightly in front of my left. That's not really obvious, but that is what's happening. Here's definitely what's not obvious. I'm leaning forward. You can't see that. Let me tell you, I'm leaning forward. I'm on the balls of my feet, I'm leaning forward. Now, let me tell you where I'm looking, because you can't tell. No, I'm not looking at the rim. You look at the rim and you're gonna hit the rim. You don't look at the rim. You look up and over behind the rim. That's where I'm looking. All right, so I'm leaning forward. My knees are flexed. I'm looking up and over behind the rim. Now I'm just hold the ball. You don't need to spin it. You don't need to do it. Just hold the ball. All right? Hold the ball. I'm looking up and over the rim. I'm looking up and over the rim. I'm leaning forward. Now here's what I'm saying to myself. I'm thinking up, 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 snap. Up, 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 snap. Up, 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 snap. That's what I'm doing. Up, 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 snap. Okay, now I want you to do this. I want you to talk me through what you're thinking as you do it. That's a think aloud. Just doing one, just showing them how to put two sentences together, how to insert a transition. How did you know which transition? How did you know we needed a transition? How did you get there? All this buzz about growth mindset, we got to replace their thoughts with the thoughts of the expert.
So what did you think about that explanation of the differences between think alouds and modeling? Feel free to drop your ideas in the chat. I was very surprised. I did not expect her to be athletic. I saw her hair and her jewelry and her makeup, and who knew that she was an expert in basketball, right? So earlier when Elisa talked about the definition of inclusive literacy, we said that we wanted to expand that definition, right? We wanted to think about what inclusive literacy, not just in terms of reading and writing, but that we wanted to expand that definition to talk about communication, problem solving, critical thinking, and navigating digital media. I'm just going to check your chat here. Love how this demonstrates the metacognitive aspect. I like seeing that two of them needed to go together, replacing their thoughts with the thoughts of experts. It gives the learners a way to think about what they're learning. Okay. Anybody want to come off mute and share their reaction to this? Have you seen this before?
Just to expand on what I said, I do think there's something to just modeling in and of itself, but I love how she both modeled what to do and she thought aloud. And so to show how the two of those work together, I think we learn often from having examples and just looking at the examples, but I think we would learn deeper by understanding why that example works or how that example works.
And there's a time and place for each, right? I agree, Jennifer, sometimes modeling works, right? Sometimes you just want to show, and sometimes maybe the language or the spoken word can get in the way. But the takeaway from here is that there is a difference, and her demonstration of thinking aloud, she made it seem effortless, and it's not always that easy, right? We're not always completely conscious of our thinking processes. And so to think aloud, you have to be conscious of them, and you have to be able to convey and communicate them when you're working with a learner or student. So let's expand on that idea there.
Elise, before you go on, you know, the one thing that the chat has triggered, even just rewatching this video, is back to what someone shared about the power of the learner being able to advocate for what I need. As the designer of the learning, when might I pivot from a think aloud to a model or model to a think aloud? But how powerful for the learner to say, excuse me, you need to tell me what you're thinking, how you got over there, because I don't blah, 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 right? The power of being able to do it with surgical precision, right? That the learner can do it and the facilitator of learning can also do it is part of the challenge that I'm seeing here surfaced.
Yeah, how many kids would stop you and say, wait, can you explain more, or can you tell me, can you show me again?
Yeah, well, in math, we always say, the kids always say like, oh, I don't get it, right? And we worked on that, right? In AVID, we use the language of what is the point of confusion, so on and so forth. But this meta piece of being able to articulate what about this seems still confusing would be really powerful in every subject area, I assume. Yeah.
So that's what we need to do here to foster expert learning, is to empower students to advocate for themselves. But we also don't want to just stop at the question about how can learners read and write like scientists or mathematicians or historians. I'd like you to ask yourselves, what would thinking out loud look like in these various content areas? So in front of you, you see a list of traits and characteristics of expert learners. Under the category or principle of engagement, we said that expert learners are purposeful and motivated. So if you look at those bullet points, those are all examples or traits or ways that the characteristics are displayed, the characteristics of expert learners. I'm going to give you a chance to read this, but let me just go through the next two columns. The next column is representation. And we said that expert learners in this area are resourceful in knowledge. So this is where they do things like consider their background knowledge, or they know what tools or resources to go to outside of what's presented to them. And then in the area of action and expression, expert learners are strategic and goal-directed. This is where they organize, plan, monitor their progress, try a different approach. I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to go ahead and read through these bullet points on your own, just to familiarize yourself of what expert learning looks like in a student. And you may actually think of certain students that you have or have had in the past who exhibit these traits. So hopefully you've had a chance to read through those bullet points. If you haven't, you'll have another chance momentarily. So for the last activity of the day, let's focus on this last bullet point here. And it says abandon plans and strategies that are ineffective. So we're going to use that kind of as a jumping off point. If we think about the basketball example and the presenter in that video, she said, you know, if I look at the rim, I'm going to miss the shot. I'm going to look up and over the rim. So how did she discover that? At some point, she must have aimed from the rim, or she must have looked at the rim and then self-corrected after she missed those shots. And then she realized she needed to stop looking at the rim. She needed to start looking up and over the rim. And that's how she became an expert in basketball. So she learned this through trial and error, through practice, and by being willing to abandon plans and strategies that were ineffective and maybe try a different approach. So if we looked at that one bullet point, abandon plans and strategies that are ineffective, and we applied them to a particular content area like science or math or history, what might that look like or sound like as a think aloud? I'm going to give you 5 minutes now to go to a discussion board and populate those thoughts. But let me give you an example first. So I'm going to go here. And they're all structured the same, even though they're grouped by grade level. So abandon plans and ineffective strategies and maybe try a different approach. So what statements might you include in a think aloud that models expert learning in a particular content area? So in science, you might say, well, that last experiment gave me some good information, but I need to come up with a new hypothesis, right? In math, it might be, I think I need to try a different approach. Maybe if I did partial products, I'd come up with a different answer. History could be, you know, I've been looking at this event through the lens of cause and effect. What if I looked at it through the lens of different perspectives? Would I get a deeper understanding of this event? So you can go ahead and look at any of these other bullet points here, but just for the sake of focus, if you wanted to focus on this one and think about what are ways that you could think aloud that would help your students so that they could emulate you eventually in their own pursuit of expert learning. So we're going to take 5 minutes, and the links to the discussion boards are in the chat, and they're organized from PK, pre-K through 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. So feel free to choose your grade level and populate the possible statements you would be making in your content area if you were to think aloud. So we'll reconvene in 5 minutes at about 4:16. Red that I really like, and then I'm going to invite everybody else to go ahead and share one that resonated with them. But on the 9th through 12th expert learning discussion board, someone wrote, I'm thinking about a world languages classroom. One thing that's always a challenge is getting kids or students to speak the new language. As with the basketball Think Aloud, maybe we could try being more explicit with students to help them formulate what to say in a conversation. Like when you hear someone ask "Cuándo," you're going to be responding with a time or a date, rather than simply teaching a list of question words that kids memorize in a list. Really coaching kids through authentic language use. And that person, I hope you finish your thought, Anonymous Dolphin. And if you wanted to expand on your comment, please do so. But anybody else see something on the boards that resonated or they would like to share with the group?
Two things. That world language example for me really was really struck a chord. We get a lot of questions in our work from world language teachers about how do I expand upon this and that. I love that concept. I'm glad that you pulled that one out in our sharing. One that stood out to me, it looks like it's on the 3rd through 5th grade art portion, says, does the emotion I'm trying to convey come across in this medium? Is there a more effective medium I can explore this through? I love that art example. And for somebody that doesn't necessarily think, for example, in that language, that really brought it to life for me.
Yeah, and it's so authentic. It's like they're sharing their thought process and also sharing artistic technique at the same time. Any others? Anybody would like to share out loud?
Oh, hi, well, I'm in higher education and I sort of started to write something, but when I was watching that video, I was really thinking about the fact that, you know, we use our learning management system throughout all of our classes, and yet we make the assumption that our students know how to navigate that system. But the reality is they really don't know how to navigate it or navigate it well. And so this idea of using Think Aloud to really have them reflect on strategies that they've used in the past, what was helpful, what's been less beneficial, but also then explicitly thinking aloud and modeling ways in which they can navigate the learning management system. We sort of jot it down in our syllabus, but again, I think they really need to have the opportunity to hear somebody talk it through.
Yeah, like almost take a tour. And I think we do make assumptions sometimes that there are certain tools that learners or students can navigate without explanation. But I'm sure there are many people who would benefit from someone thinking aloud as they themselves navigate it, because not every platform is intuitive.
Right. Absolutely, absolutely. And ours is a little less so.
Okay, how about one more share out loud? Thank you, Gwen, for that world language example. I think we're all very appreciative that you shared that. Are you a world language teacher?
I was, yeah, I taught French and Spanish for a long time, and I'm actually working on a presentation for world language teachers in my district. So I thought I would challenge myself to think through this through that lens. So thanks for the feedback on that. I'll be
perfect. We love
using
it.
this example in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to hand it back to Elisa.
Thank you. So friends, fostering expert learning is teaching students not just what to learn, but how to learn, right? That's what we've been chewing on the last 40 some minutes or so. Instead of just teaching history, and we know I used to have a mentor teacher that said, if they can Google it, then you're not teaching it. Don't teach it. If they can just Google it, that can't be the only thing you're putting in front of them. So thinking about it through this lens, teaching history and also developing historians, teaching math, and developing mathematicians, teaching science and developing scientists, and teaching art and developing artists. I'm sure we came up with 1,000 more examples, right? I think my history, social science people would think that government and econ, right? Thinking about people that would be servants, right? Community leaders, so on and so forth. There's a lot more bullet points we can add to this, but that is the idea. That is the impetus for expert learning, knowing that it's beyond what we will teach in the 4 walls or the Zoom walls or whatever we're doing right now. So if you're hungry for more, one of the resources that we put together, remember that every month based on the theme, and then January's theme is expert learning, we curate and or design 4 resources, and the Got a Minute series is one that we do every month. And so in front of you, you'll see a screenshot of the Got a Minute learning series specific to expert learning. And so we just wanted to highlight, just in case you're curious, quickly the structure is set up so that if you only have 10 minutes, you do slides, let's say right in front of you, you'll see steps 1 and 2. If you've got 20 minutes or so, you do 1 through 4. And if you've got 45 minutes, 1 through 5. And so we invite you to explore those. Our website has a repository of all the different resources we've done since we started the project. But it would be interesting. So here's a quick sample. Choose one of the learning experiences below, and considering as a designer, how might we intentionally design to support the development of expert learnings, right? So it's a little bit of a deeper dive than you would get at a webinar. Thank you, Shamron. I see that you posted the website and the newsletter and just the plethora of resources. And we're also hungry for feedback. So we want to pivot and pivot. Here's the word again, 2022 pivot. We want to continue to redesign, right? It's an iterative process. And so we want to continue to design what our educators across the field need from us. So we're open to that feedback. And there's a link in the resources that could get you there. So commercial for next time. So we've just had an opportunity to engage in expert learning. Next in February, Valentine's Day, self-reflection will be the next one. And so that will be February 14th. If you'd like to register, the next slide has a QR code that has the survey, I think. Elise, if we can put that one up. The link to registration, thank you, Sharon, is in the chat. But our next one, like I said, is self-reflection. Is our 6th webinar. I cannot believe we're here already, friends. 6th webinar, 3:30 to 4:30. And again, we know a lot of our audience, right? You play back the webinar later. So we're cognizant of that too. And then again, we'd love your feedback. All right, anything else, Elise, we wanted to end with? We're giving them the gift of 7 minutes.
I welcome anyone to stay on and share in a less formal way, yeah. Anything that they took away from today or anything that they would like us to think about or explore. So we're going to go ahead and end this, but please feel free to stay on and come off mute and share any thoughts that this webinar generated for you, or any questions or any wrestlings.
Before you go, I would just add, we thrive on your feedback. So if you would be willing to fill out the feedback form that's in the chat, we would really appreciate it. Both positive, but also some deltas, suggestions for what you'd like to see different next time.
Yeah. What is your brain curious about is what I tell my team. What is your brain curious about? And then we'll go after it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.